Hello there guys, it's me Unstable Voltage and welcome to episode 6 of Europa Universalis IV. Now what I was going to cover in this episode was rebellions, and that's mainly because we actually had some rebels pop up while we were at war with Morocco. They did siege a couple of our provinces, Leon, which we managed to siege back after killing the rebels, and now we've got to go over here to Galicia and take this back because that is under siege. But I'm not going to cover too much about rebels today because I've learned recently that there is an upcoming DLC and a patch which is going to completely change the way that rebellion risks work. So it's not worth me talking about that too much at the moment. It is always worth, of course, actually having a look and seeing what your rebellion risk is like. I can never remember where this is. Yeah, under stability and expansion. So you can see what type of rebels you're likely to get and where you are likely to get them. And you can actually spend military points at the moment to either well, you can boost your stability or you can accept demands, which tells you what you would gain and lose over here on the left-hand side. And it usually costs you some sort of military power if you want to rebel stomp. The only thing I will suggest for now is if you do have a high chance of rebels spawning somewhere, it's a good idea to have your soldiers in the province where they're likely to spawn. The main reason for that is rebels don't spawn with full morale, and if you're already there when they spawn, it means that they get the attacker penalty because you're defending, and they start with limited morale, which will make it much easier for your guys to kill them. If you've got armies trying to suppress rebels in multiple provinces nearby, you can select your army, and there is actually a button somewhere around here, if I can find it. I can never find it when I'm looking for it. This one here, enable autonomous rebel suppression. So armies under the orders to suppress rebels will autonomously hunt down rebel units and besiege rebel provinces, but will steer clear of hostile armies from foreign nations. But these guys are going to go over there and unsiege that province, so I may unpause a little on the lowest speed while we're doing that. So what I'm actually going to talk about in today's video is subject nations. As you can see, it's just told me where that I've got a possible revolt in Almeria. Almeria I actually took in the peace deal from Granada, and Almeria does actually have a Castilian core on there already, which is good because it means it's part of our land. The main problem probably at the moment is that it has the Sunni religion. So what we will do is we will convert that to our own religion using one of our missionaries. But I'm not going to do that until our army is able to go and sit down over here on this land and protect it from rebels. So, in the meantime, as I said, I was going to talk about subject nations. And the main reason for doing that is because I did briefly touch upon it in the last video, mainly because we actually took Granada as a vassal. Now, there are 5 different types of subject nation which you can have in EU4 at this point. So let's just quickly go through and have a look at the different types. So we'll start at the top. The top tier of that you can have is a personal union, which is what we have going on here with Aragon. If we click on Aragon, we can see that they are the lesser partner in a personal union with Castile. What a personal union basically means is that the two nations share the same ruler. So if you actually look, we are King Juan II, the 112 leader. If we look at Aragon, it doesn't actually say who the leader is because it's a personal union. It's the same leader. It's a 112 leader with no legal heir. So the whole purpose of it is usually the result of a contested throne, because maybe their leader dies with no heir and you have a succession war, and if you win the succession war, or if there's nobody else to compete for the throne, then one ruler becomes the ruler of both lands. The smaller, less powerful nation usually becomes the lesser partner. It is possible in some circumstances to get personal unions through other means. So for example, we got this personal union with Castile as a part of a event that happens with Castile. For example, if you are playing as England, you start off in the 100 Years' War against France. If you win that war, which isn't historically accurate, but if you do win the 100 Years' War against France as England, you actually get a personal union with France as the one of the victory conditions, or one of the peace deal things. So there are several ways to get a personal union. Now, when you're in a personal union, they will basically freely give you military access, so I can move my armies into their land because it counts as my land. We don't get any money from them directly. They are still autonomous, so they do their own thing. They build their own units and do what they want, but they will automatically get called to war if I go to war with somebody else. I don't believe they can start wars on their own, but if I go to war with somebody or somebody goes to war with me, they have to fight. They're automatically called in. So that's a personal union. The next step down from the personal union is a vassal. Now, a vassal is exactly what we've got going on here with Granada. Now, there are two ways that you can actually vassalize a nation. Firstly, you can take a nation as a vassal in a peace deal, assuming the nation is small enough and you have enough war score to be able to vassalize them. The second way to vassalize a nation is to diplomatically vassalize them. If you've got a small enough nation and you have a high enough reputation with them and you're friendly enough, you may be able to ask them to become one of your vassals and they may agree. Now, one thing I didn't mention about personal unions, which is possible for vassals as well, is if you become unfriendly with them, if you have negative opinions of each other, if you fall out with each other, they may attempt to go to war with you for independence, particularly if they think they are stronger than you. So even when you have a personal union, it's very possible that they could decide to attack you for independence. I'm quite surprised Aragon hasn't done it at this point yet. Smaller nations are less likely to do it. Now, vassals can do the same thing. A vassal can actually attempt to go to war with you if your reputation with them becomes low enough to go for independence. Now, the difference with having a vassal as opposed to just taking territory itself is that vassals are still autonomous, so they still do their own thing. It doesn't count technically as your land, so it doesn't increase your force limit or your manpower, but they still have their own force limit, so they will still produce their own units and be autonomous. And of course, you can still enter their land as if it was your own. Now, the thing with vassals, again, if you go into a war, your vassals have to fight for you. There is no say in the matter. They have to come into the fight for you. And another good thing from vassals is if you actually have a look at your subjects, and we can see that we have Granada as a vassal, we are getting money from Granada. And that's because your vassals have to give you a percentage of their tax on each month. I think it's about 40 or 50%. I'm not sure of the exact number, but the point of it is you actually get money from your vassals. Now, when you have a vassal, you can later on attempt to integrate them, to annex them, so that they become part of your nation. Now, that does take time and a lot of administration power. And if you annex a vassal, you do lose a bit of relations with all of your other vassals. But there certainly is a way of doing that, and that is something that we will cover more in this series as it goes on. Now, the main reason why you may want a vassal is, one, sometimes it's actually easier taking a vassal and integrating it as an annexed state later. If I had have been able to take all of Granada during the peace treaty, which I couldn't, of course, because Portugal had seized one of their provinces. If I'd have sieged all of the provinces, I would have been able to have taken the whole of Granada, just like I did with Almeria in the peace deal. Now, that's not so bad for Castile in this case, because Castile actually already has cores on the... where are we? Wait, it doesn't really matter anyway, because it's already showing us that. View our country. We already had cores on these Granadan provinces as Castile. So we didn't have to worry about it. It doesn't give us any over-expansion. Castile considers both of these to be cores. Now, if we had, for example, taken some land from Portugal, we don't have any cores on the Portuguese land. And taking that land would would give us overextension. But what you can do is, by making someone into a vassal, it doesn't actually count as overextension. So that is a useful thing to do. Now, you might also want to have a vassal if you are taking land overseas. Now, remember, you can't vassalize an individual province. You can only vassalize smaller nations. But if we were to go over here somewhere, for example, and pick on Tunisia. Tunisia only have 3... provinces, so they may be small enough for us to vassalize. Now, the problem is we're in Europe and Tunisia is in Africa. Now, this would even work with Morocco, even though Morocco actually is very, very close to us geographically. But you actually get a penalty called distant overseas. And if you have the distant overseas penalty, you get a 75% reduction in the amount of tax that you receive from having overseas land. So sometimes if I were to take Tunisia over, it would be more sensible for me to actually have them as a vassal, because I would get 40% or 50% of their tax base, than for me to take it as my own land, which would give me overextension, and also I would get the minus 75% distant overseas penalty. So that is why vassals can be quite useful. Now, there is a lesser state of vassal. Have we run that siege yet? No, we haven't. Right, what are we going on here? Just a little event. So we've got an event. We can lose 1 base tax in Jaén and gain 1 in Toledo and lose a stability. Or we can decrease our mobility cost modifier by 10%, but also decrease the morale of our armies by 10%. Well, we're not currently at war. It lasts for 20 years. Let us go for that. We are going to need to build some more troops as well, because we are quite below our force limit. So, oh, we don't have the manpower. We're still really, really short on manpower. That's why these guys are reinforcing so slowly. So, there's a lesser type of vassalisation, which is called a protectorate. Now, you can only vassalise another nation if they have 50% or more of your technological level. So if you are trying to or want to vassalise a nation that has less than 50% of your tech, it's not possible to do. What you have to do with those nations, and this is usually going to happen, you can't see them on the map because we haven't discovered it yet, but if we were to go far enough down into Africa, you might find some little sort of tribes that are sort of quite, what the game refers to as technologically backwards. Now, when you find these small sort of nations that have really low tech, you can offer to make them a protectorate. Now, what making them a protectorate is, they don't give you any of their money, but they're unable to form alliances with anybody else. They can go off and have their own little wars with people if they wish to. You don't have to get involved in that at all. They do get called into war if you go to war, though, so they do have to respond as allies when you go to war. The main differences between a protectorate and a vassal, other than the fact that they don't give you any money, is that them being your protectorate actually gives them a minus 20% technology cost bonus. So the idea is you protectorate a less advanced nation and it helps them to gain up in tech, which is good, because if they catch up with you enough, then you would eventually be able to convert them into a vassal, which is going to be significantly better. But while they are a protectorate, no one else is able to ally with them, and you are also able to head through their territory, which is quite useful. We have to repay a loan, so let's go ahead and do that, try and get some more money in the bank. So we've covered personal unions, we have covered vassals, and we have covered protectorates. Again, protectorates, I'm not sure whether or not they can actually go to war with you for independence, though most of the time any nation that you protectorize is going to be so small and weak, they're not really going to have much of a chance of doing that anyway. The other two types of subject nations are colonial nations and trade companies. Now, colonial nations were added with the, not the Wealth of Nations, the, oh, what was it called? Whatever the American expansion pack is, the one that adds the Americas. That's the one that actually gives you the ability to do this with the colonial nations. Now, I can't really show you that at the moment because we don't have any colonies and we can't even see America. But when you actually go on to the colonial map, I don't know if we're necessarily going to be able to see it from here. I can never remember which one of these is the colonial map. So let me just have a quick look. Tech, trade, supply limit, buildings, missionaries, trade goods, trade companies, colonial regions. There we go. If we actually look at colonial regions, there aren't any here in Europe, but you would see them in America, I believe around the Cape of Africa and Australia as well. The world is split up into these colonial regions, and you can colonize any piece of territory, any province that isn't currently claimed by anybody. If you can reach it, you can colonize it. If you manage to get one or two or three or four colonies in America, for example, they will still count as your land. So, for example, if I was to go over and find Florida and colonize Florida, Florida would become part of Castile. If I were to get 5 colonized provinces all next to each other and all in the same colonial region, they would form what is called a colonial nation. So it might be Castilian East America or Castilian West Indies or something like that, depending on where you actually settle. And what you can do with those colonial nations is they have their own government and they have their own leader. They still get called into war when you go to war, so they automatically count as your allies, but they can also go off and fight their own wars with their own neighbours. Now, they do have a certain level of what is called autonomy, because you do have to maintain a reputation and relations with them, and they do actually pay you a certain percentage of their tax every month, so it is well worth having colonial nations where you can. Now, colonial nations don't count towards your diplomatic relations limit, neither do protectorates. Vassals do count towards your relation limits, and personal unions count towards your relations limits, but protectorates don't, and colonial nations don't. Now, the other type of words just losing me. Subjects. The other type of subject you can have is a trade company. Now, the way a trade company works is if you control more than 50% of the trade within a trade region, you can actually establish a trade company. Trade company regions. There we go. So again, we can't actually see where the trade company regions are because at this point, we can only really see Europe. We can't see the major parts of Africa and all around the Indies. Now, we'll talk about trade probably a little bit more in another video because the trade is a little bit complicated. But if you actually see in the trade map mode, you can actually see where all the different trade nodes are. Now, just zooming out and looking at trade, you can see all of these different main trade nodes. And trade is very, very complicated. I did think about sort of mixing it in with this video. I don't have 100% understanding on the trade, but that is something that we can talk about at another time. But if you do have enough control over trade in certain trade areas, you can establish a trade company. Now, the way a trade company works is you usually get an extra merchant for having a trade company. You don't get as much tax from a trade company nation. You also don't get as much manpower from the land, but you do get more trade power. So ultimately, if you've got something that is far away and not all that useful to you because it's distant overseas, if you've got enough trade power there, you can convert it into a trade company, and that counts as a subject. But again, it doesn't add to your diplomatic relations. But that is something that I will cover in another video. So we've talked now about the 5 different types of subjects you can have. I'm still going to allow my soldiers here to try and unsiege this place here before we start heading down and trying to convert the religion on Almeria there. Now, what I do want to check is I want to have a quick look at my relations and see what I have got here. So I'm currently allied with England and the Portuguese. Morocco and Algiers have a coalition against us. Naples and Aragon are partners in a personal union. Now, the reason we've got Naples as a lesser partner is because Naples was already in a personal union with Aragon when all this thing kicked off. We have a royal marriage with England and Navarra and with Portugal. We shouldn't be able to get a royal marriage with Aragon because they're already a subject of ours anyway, so they don't actually have to have a royal marriage. We could potentially get a royal marriage with Naples, which probably isn't a bad idea to do. Where I see the improving relations, the Papal State's trying to improve relations with us. If we click on Naples here, we can offer them a royal marriage. We don't actually have a diplomat to send at the moment, so we're going to recall the diplomat from Aragon that's improving relations. And we are, as soon as he gets back... Oh, no, it's because they're still a subject of Castile. Of course they are. What am I on about? So we can't royal marriage with them. We're already royal married with Navarra. So let's go back to... improving our relations with Aragon, mainly because I don't want Aragon to try and go for a war of independence. Now, we can see that France are doing a bit of rebel stomping up here. So, Navarra. Navarra has a royal marriage with both of us. They are a vassal of Aragon. So, at this point, I can't actually take Navarra over. However, if we do manage to integrate Aragon, we would also get Navarra as well. And Navarra has actually had a warning from France. France may declare war on Navarra if Navarra starts a war against a third party. I can't really see Navarra starting any particular wars at this time. Now, Granada is a vassal of ours. Now, one thing that we will be able to do at some point under alliance actions, was it relations actions? Could never remember where it is. Let's find it. Influence actions. Annex vassal. There we go. We don't have any diplomats to send. That's the first problem. The second problem is the vassal needs to have at least 190 opinion of us for us to be able to start annexation. So it's much easier to annex a vassal if you took them diplomatically than if you took them as part of a peace deal, because obviously that means you've been at war and they're likely to have a lesser opinion of you to start with. So you do have to, the maximum I think you can get someone's opinion up to is like 200. So they have to have a positive 190 or more opinion of you to start annexation. You can only annex a nation which has been a vassal for at least 10 years, which it hasn't. And it has to be whom we have the relationship of more than 190, or is the effect of a certain peace resolution. It's not possible for us to offer vassalisation before the 23rd of February 1462, because that will be 10 years after the war has ended. And to start the process, it will cost us 135 diplomatic power. So we do need to save up some diplo power if we do that, and we won't be able to do it for another 8 years. Now, I don't think we've got anybody around who we could potentially offer a vassalisation to, but if we look at someone there like Corsica, Corsica have a positive opinion of us. Now, what we could do is offer vassalisation. Now, they won't take it, but I'm just going here so I can show you the pop-up. We don't have any diplomats to send. To offer vassalisation, we must have a military alliance first, but getting a military alliance isn't too difficult. Must have a relationship of at least 190 positive again, which is fine. Have the same religion, and the target country must be at peace. Now, we can already see here from Corsica that they are at peace. They have a truce with Genoa and Savoy. They've got no wars going on at the moment. We could possibly get a military alliance with them. Their opinion of us is only +9. So at the moment, we're nowhere near being able to vassalize them there. And what was the other option? Same religion. So if we actually click left-click on their province, we can see that their religion is Catholic. So we could technically, if we had a high enough relations with Corsica, and if we actually had a military alliance with them, we could offer them vassalization. So that is certainly something that we can do. We can either lose 1 stability or lose 5 prestige. Now, we're not particularly high on either, but as I said at the start of this series, stability is very, very important. So you never want to let your stability drop. So we're going to lose the 5 prestige. A couple of other buttons I haven't shown you guys yet, which you won't use very often, but they're good to know. We've established where your capital is. It's where you see the little crown on one of the flags in your provinces. If you were to go to another province, you have the options up here. We can't actually do it at the moment because we have rebels around, which we're sorting out. But when you don't have any rebels, you can move your capital to another province. You can also move your trading port. Now, your main trading port is usually your capital at the start of the game, but maybe sometimes you find somewhere better for it to go. You can't move your capital overseas unless you only have a single province remaining in Europe. If you have a single province in Europe and you have overseas provinces, you can move your capital over there, but otherwise you have to stay in Europe. And you can only move it every so often, and it does cost you a certain, I think it's administrative power to move your capital, diplomatic power to move your capital trading port, but it just won't let us do it because rebels are around. Sometimes it's useful because what you may find is you end up in a war and the enemy takes land. So, for example, my capital is Toledo. If I went to war with France and they managed to take Madrid, Jaén, Murcia, Cabora, Badajoz, and Caceres, whatever that's called, then Toledo would be totally isolated from the rest of my territory. So what I might want to do then is go and move my capital to something like Lyon so that it's connected up with everything else, because that one little province is more likely to fall later on. But I think I've covered the main points that I wanted to go over with the subjects and the subject nations. We will talk a little bit more about trade in future videos, and we will progress to a point where we can start showing you some of the annexation and integration. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. I hope you are still enjoying these EU4 tutorials. As I've said before, I'm not really a pro at this game, but I know enough about the game to be able to play it and to, well, have fun playing it, and hopefully you'll be able to pick up enough from me to have a basic understanding of how the game's major mechanics work. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye for now.